Good evening, everybody. Tonight we have an exciting show. We were going to do this last week, and I would like to tell everybody out there number one, I do apologize for not being able to do the show last week. Number two, I would like to thank everybody for the text messages, the emails, the Facebook messages. I showed a lot of those to my mom, and it made her feel happy to know that people from other countries, even that had no clue who her husband was, felt like saying, "Hey, we want to offer our condolences." So making her feel good was very important. So for that, I say thanks. Tonight we have Jeff with us. He is joining us from Prince George, British Columbia. Are you on your way to Alaska?
Yep, I'm still on my way.
So, how is it?
The scenery is awesome, right? I mean, I've never seen so many white-capped mountains in my life. And there's a lot of distance between one town and the next. And you can go a long stretch without seeing another car. I mean, it's perfect for me, but that's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Everybody says, well, why didn't you fly? Well, then I wouldn't have seen this. So if you're a flyer, that's fine. But I'm a driver. And
so, I mean, I like the quickness of flying, but I don't like the heights. I despise airports because I'm not real keen on crowded places.
Yep.
So I get the driving. I mean, this past week, I left my house in Central Alabama at 6 p.m., drove to South Carolina, picked up a dog, shook some hands, said hello to some people, looked at some beautiful birds, and drove back home. So I get it.
Yep. It's a lot easier to find a tree alongside the road than it is to use them airplane restrooms. So
yeah, the latrine in the airplane they're designed for toothpicks.
Yeah, really little people.
And no, that's like absolute emergency. I'm fixing to die. That's when you go there.
Yeah.
But there's always that one guy.
Oh yeah.
That'll do it anyway. How about you, Rip? How are you doing?
I am doing great. I'm really excited about being on the show again tonight. I'm looking forward to it so much.
Well, I got to tell you, I had a lot of people reach out after the last show, and they you knew your stuff, and they really enjoyed the fact, a lot of times when you ask people questions, they don't really want you to, but they really like that you took their questions and tried to help them out as much as possible. So one of the questions that I have gotten a whole lot is how, people looking for advice on how to start a breeding program. What should you select? Where should you get your foundation flock from? I mean, you and I have had that conversation.
Oh,
those are big things. So what I wanted to discuss tonight is, how did you start? So the first question that I have for you is, how did you learn to breed your birds by family lines?
Well, I had been breeding and showing. I started when that was 1960. I didn't really learn how to do the method that I use now until about 1985. And I stumbled across an article in a old Rhode Island Red Chronicle by a fellow by the name of Kenny Bowles, and he was talking about breeding by family lines. And I thought, hey, that makes sense. It sounds pretty easy. It's a form of line breeding, but my eyes glaze over and cross when I see all those little dotted lines and the solid lines and different colors and all that kind of stuff. It's heebie-jeebies. But I had struck up a conversation with a guy I ultimately wound up getting my birds from at a show one time, and that was E.W. Reese. And he told me that he uses a version of that. And when he explained it, I thought, that's a whole lot easier than what I was thinking about doing. So what I know about breeding this way is I learned from Mr. Reese.
Okay. So when you got started, did you start with eggs, chicks, mature birds? Why? How how did all that happen?
For many, many years, I went the hatching eggs or baby chick route. And that's when I learned about what I call the rule of 10. For every 10 birds you raise to maturity, you're going to get maybe one that's good enough to keep.
Right.
And I realized how much money I was sinking into birds to find one or two decent ones to start with by using eggs or chicks. So I decided I would bite the bullet. Even back in the mid 80s, they were not cheap, but I got started with 2 trios of large fowl Rhode Island Reds. But the thing that I like about starting with mature birds, now, when I say mature, these were probably 9, 10 months old. I can't remember exactly, but what you see by then is what you got. I mean, your type is set by then. Your color is pretty well set by then. They're not going to change a lot. If you raise baby chicks, they're going to change a lot. If you raise from hatching eggs, they're going to change a lot. But the advantage of getting mature birds, they don't change much at all. Now, they will between 1 and 2 years, but not dramatically.
Yeah. I mean, that's going to be genetics.
Yes.
But so, like, for me, I did like everybody. I mean, I tried to cheap out. I bought some chicks. Actually, I think first I bought, and the thought of this makes me cringe now. The first ones when I was getting back into chickens, I bought hatching eggs off of eBay.
Oh, been there and done that. I was even doing a version of that before there was an eBay.
And like, the bad thing is what I bought and the pictures that I saw on eBay, that ain't what I got.
Yeah, that happens too many times.
I was really mad. And I mean, the person had great reviews, but it sucked. And then so I started looking and I found chicks and I was like, okay, well, let me try that. That's a little cheaper than the other. So I did that. And these birds, I don't know if the rule of 10 might have been like the rule of 15 or 20. Because, at one point I find myself sending you pictures and, you said, I don't know that would be worthy of a bowl of noodles. I want to say that's how you put it.
Probably something close to that. I think I might have said, put him with 16 grains of rice and you'll have the dinner.
Either way, I was like, And then when I started searching, I found a really good trio. And knowing what that stuff goes for, it is a lot. But I think had I started that route, I would have saved money on brooding stuff that was garbage, feeding stuff that was garbage.
Absolutely.
Waiting 6 to 8 months to see what my chicks were going to look like to find 50 disappointments. And yeah, like when you start with a trio or 4 adult birds, it's not going to be like a box of chocolates. That's what it is.
And Kerry, we've all been there and done that probably.
Oh yeah.
It's when I stopped to think how much money I had tied up in hatching eggs or baby chicks and feed to get them to 9 or 10 months old. Like you said, it was a no-brainer. My gosh, it saved me a lot of money in the long run. It was more of an initial investment, but I was money ahead by doing that. I realize that now.
I wish I had learned that sooner, and I wish I would have learned about culling sooner. Because if I had the money back on the feed that I spent hoping my birds would get better, then I could have had the money to buy that really nice trio to begin with.
Well, and you're right on there. And one thing I didn't learn soon enough was that genetics will only take you so far. If you don't have good management techniques, flock management techniques, and you don't have high quality feed, it's going to slow your progress down because you'll never know what the true genetic potential of your birds are.
So this past weekend, I was up in South Carolina at the SCGBA show, and there's a guy that lives 10, 15 minutes, depending on how fast you drive away, that sells cages. And, he had them, you go pick them up. And I needed some more of the 38 by 38 so I can put 1 to 2 birds in. And I needed some more of those. I was told to go to this guy. This guy, he's telling me, go to this address. You'll see a house. It's a brand new house on the left side of the road. Keep going straight. You're going to pass the blue house, and then you're going to see a road that cuts back sharp to the left and turn down that dirt road. So I'm, sounds sketch as everything, but he come recommended by a good friend. So I'm good with it. I pulled down and I see him and a few other guys building a rather large pen, like 2 acres, which I later find out is going to be his grow out. As I keep driving down this dirt road, I see at least hundreds, possibly 2,000 birds. Everything from tie cords to pens to cages with groups like grow outs. And I was just like, law. I mean, it was amazing. But with that in mind, how do you locate a breeder that has what you want, or the birds that you want to buy when you start, if that's what you're going to do? If you're going to bite the bullet and start with adult birds, how do you find them?
The first piece of advice I tell folks is do not get in a hurry. Don't get so anxious to get birds. You get birds that you settled for, not birds that can really do you any good. And man, I've settled for a lot of birds too.
Jeff's laughing. He's like, I know Carrie's done it, and he probably has too.
Everybody's done it.
Yeah,
everybody's done it. Impatience is human nature. So, some people can only wait so long, and once you get burned 2-3 times, then you have more patience to wait it out and find a good bird.
Yeah.
You get more picky too.
Yeah.
Because,
yeah. Kerry, what I did was I was raising Wyandotte Bantams when I decided to get large fowl reds. And I was going to shows, and I knew Mr. Reese. I mean, we had spoken casually at the show, nothing in detail or anything. And I knew he had pretty good reds. But what I decided to do was I started looking in Poultry Press because they print show results in that little newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking in the southeastern states. Okay, because I wanted birds from the southeast because that's where I live. I didn't want to bring birds down here from up north or out west because it's a big adjustment for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I started seeing who was consistently winning with reds at shows. And right off the bat, it was Mr. Reese. But to take it a little bit further, I dug into the show reports as, you can win best of breed if you take just one bird. But I was looking at people who showed a display. A display is a minimum of a cock, hen, cockerel, and pullet, and any three other birds. So that's 7 birds. And those people who were winning the display awards, that tells you they're a good breeder if they can pull that off. Then I started talking. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, but otherwise, anybody can get lucky and win a show.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take 7 birds and you're pulling it off with that, that says that you can duplicate the process.
Well, that's the mark of a good breeder. Anybody that can win champion display or reserve champion display, you need to pay attention to their birds. But I also started talking with some judges here in Florida that I knew. I say that like we got a lot of judges. I think back then we had 2. But I said, who would you get Rhode Island Reds from? And they all said, Mr. Reese. And then I started talking with him. Now, my first call to him was probably early spring. And I told him I was looking for mature birds. He said, I don't have anything like that now that I'll turn loose of. Check back with me in October. So that just made me wait even longer, which about killed me. But I didn't know it at the time because that was a real blessing in disguise. Because that gave me some additional time to really study the breed standard over and over. I basically had the breed standard memorized, both for type and for color. And I spent time, excuse me, looking at all of the photographs of winning Rhode Island Reds that I could lay my hands on. So not only did I know the standard, I had a good visual reference for the kind of birds that I was hoping to get.
So that way, when it came time for that transaction to happen, you wasn't basically buying from a used car salesman.
No.
You knew what you were there to look for. You had it in your mind. You had read descriptions about it. You had watched and seen it happen. You've seen his birds win. Other people said his birds won. Like you knew. You didn't have any doubts.
It wasn't a crapshoot by any stretch of the imagination. Plus, what paid off big time for me was by contacting him at shows and talking with him and then contacting him for birds. I didn't know I was really doing it at the time, but I was forming a relationship with Mr. Reese.
Yeah.
To the point that when I got my birds, I thought, well, I'm going to ask a $64,000 question, is that I'll ask him if he would be my mentor. And he said, let me think about it. And I don't know.
I mean,
maybe a month or so ago or a month or so later, he called me up and he says, okay, I'll do that. I'll be your mentor. And what I learned from that man, I could not have paid big bucks and got it in an education in school.
I've actually looked into that and looked at some class material for what you would learn at school. And there's not a lot that it's not that valuable.
No.
And it's not worth the time. I have learned more from individual people than what I've read in books. I've even learned more from individuals than what I learned in books that they told me to read, to learn about the topic.
Yeah.
Because like one of the things that I've been studying is, I've been studying for several years is poultry nutrition. And, Jeff said, read this book and we'll talk. Well, I read the book and I learned a few things, but actually talking about it and breaking it down by topic really made me understand the whys. So that could probably be the benefit in having a mentor and somebody to teach you that. And I would caution people when looking for a mentor and make sure you do your homework, because, that was back in the 80s where people were more wholesome. There's a ridiculous number of scammers in poultry
crazy
these days.
It's crazy. Absolutely.
So
nuts.
People should be really, really cautious with that. What did you do anything to help you select the birds that you wanted to buy?
When I went up there, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if he was going to hand me 2 trios of reds and say, here, I picked these out for you, which would have been fine, okay, because I trusted him. But I had some specific thoughts in my mind what I wanted. I wanted, if I could get them, and turns out I couldn't, I wanted 4 full sisters. But I had to settle for 4 pin sisters because he didn't pedigree hatch. But I picked out 4, and then let me backtrack a little bit. The way he started with me, he said, I tell you what I'm going to do. He said, I don't do this for many people. He said, you go in that pen right there full of pullets and you pick out a bird you want and you bring her to me. I'm going to look her over, and if I want you to have her, I'll let you have her. If I want to keep her, I'll tell you that. Well,
that could go either way.
Yeah, the first 4 I picked up, he said, nope, can't have that one. And I finally picked up one. He said, I'll let that one go with reservations.
Well, I mean, part of that selection process is probably him testing you to further see if he wants to mentor you, to see how much homework you've done.
I think that's exactly what he was doing. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was testing me to see first how much I knew about reds.
Yeah.
And whether what I knew or not was right. But I picked out 4 pin sisters as closely matched as I could get, and which was hard because there was about 300 Rhode Island red pullets in that pen.
It's nice how they'll grow out.
Oh, he said, all right, let's go over and get you a couple of cockerels. He said, do you know what you want? I said, I think so. I had it in my mind, the strong points of those females and the weak points. And so when I was going through the male birds, it was the same thing, go in and pick out whatever you want. And I picked out 2, not from the same breeding pen. Okay. I got 2 from 2 different breeding pens. So they weren't real jammed up related. But I picked out males that would offset the weaknesses of the females. And that's the bird I started with.
Okay.
Now, I realized later, he told me later on, he said, you really should have got 3 trios. Well, I didn't have the money for 3 trios, and I knew it. But I got another trio from him about a year or so later. And that was the foundation, starting with 3 trios, of how I started my family line breeding. I made 3 families out of those 3 trios. And I did it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that way you have closely related, but not too close related.
Right.
And you also have options to where if something shows up later, you can have an option to offset a trade or whatever.
Well, the beauty about his system that later became my system was that all the females in a breeding pen were related. They were either mother, daughters, aunts, nieces, grandmothers, daughters, whatever, but they were all related. The male I would take from another pen, and this kept from getting too closely inbred.
Got
I may
it.
use the same male for a year or two. I may not, but all just depended on the quality of birds I was getting.
Okay.
But it's in a sense like the commercial guys use loosely, is they have an inbred line, they cross it with a line bred line, they cross it with another line to get the birds they want. And that's really what I was doing. The beauty about doing it that way, Kerry, was he got his birds originally from Miss Donaldson up in Georgia. And she had been breeding them 40 years. When he got them at the time I went up there, he had them for 30 years. And he learned how to breed from her. Okay. So they'd been under the same breeding system 70 years by the time I laid eyes on them. And the uniformity was absolutely incredible. That's why it was so hard to pick out birds that I wanted. Even uniformity between pens. It was like a whole bunch of peas in one pod.
And when you talk about line breeding, people are like, "Oh, you can't breed brothers or sisters," and da 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 da. But I mean, that's that method, 70 years right there, and I'm pretty sure that it's been a lot longer.
Well, I had them for another 30, 32 years before I had to get out of them because I was working a job that I just couldn't get time off, and I couldn't get home in time to take care of them, and it was not being right with the birds.
Right.
I wasn't being fair to them, so I just gave them up, and that was probably the hardest thing to do I've ever done because I knew, Mr. Reese was getting on up in years, and frankly, he passed away not more than about 10 years after I met him, but there was nowhere to go to get that bloodline after he was gone. If anything happened to my birds, at least that's what I thought. But when I decided to get back into reds, I looked and looked and looked, and everybody that said they had pure Reese birds, I could look at the birds and say, no, those are not pure Reese birds. I can tell by their type. And finally, one of our group members on Poultry Keepers 360, I had not met Sue at this time, Sue Dobson. When I first met her, she had Crevecoeurs, crested breed from France. And well, she still does, and then one day she mentioned that she had gotten some Rhode Island Reds. And I said, "Oh, okay. Where'd you get them from? If you don't mind me asking you." And she said, and she told me, and immediately it started clicking in my head because when he mentioned that guy's name, I knew he had got his birds from Dennis Myers and had not put any other bloodlines in them. And Dennis Myers got his birds from Mr. Reese about the same time that I got my bird. And as soon as Sue sent me a picture, I looked at the birds and I thought, yeah, that's what I've been looking for. So that's how I was
So,
able to get my line back.
what did you use when you were selecting those birds when you would pick them up? What were you looking at?
Well, before I would ever pick them up, I looked at how they stood, how they moved, because that's so important. If you um, if you have a bird that looks off balance in the body, he's going to be off balance in the show pen. But once I picked him up, I looked at things like width of back, length of back, and you can use your hands to measure that. Depth of body from the back to the tip of the keel bone, depth of body in the front from the back to the front of the keel bone, length of keel bone. I wanted birds that had a good body capacity, because if you don't have good body capacity in your birds, you're just whistling Dixie. They're not going to grow well. They're not going to produce well, and they're not going to look all that good.
Is there anything that you would do different today?
Yeah, I'd start earlier. I wouldn't put it off for that long. I don't think so. And I've thought about that a lot, Kerry, and I have not been able to come up with anything that I thought would make that system any better. It's so simple. And, you keep all your females from one pen in that same pen always. Only change out your male. And there's a couple of things to doing that. That's where I got really good uniformity. Okay. Plus, so many people maintain their families through the male, and so many people don't keep extra males, because that you're going to have a lot of males if you do it that way. And if something happens and your male dies, or predators get him or whatever, that line is dead in the water right there at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But I could have a dog get in the pen and kill the male and 2 or 3, 4 females, and I'd still have females left to carry on with. Just bring in another male.
Friend of mine in Mississippi, he actually had that happen. He had some birds that he'd got from his mentor, and predators got in this past year and knocked one of his lines almost completely out. And it was rough. He said he's devastated. He don't know. He hopes that he's got something he can hatch to recuperate.
Oh, it's a heartbreaker when something like that happens. And I hate to hear people having that experience, because been there, done that. I know.
Yep. So with the keeping your hands in the pen and moving the rooster around, describe this process that you use to breed, where you can get the uniformity and all that good stuff.
Well, it's just selecting the best females you have to go back into the breeding pen. One year it may be one year the next year it may be 4 or 5. But I had pen 1, 2, 3 to start with. But all the females that came out of pen 1 would always go back into pen 1 if I decided to keep them. Now, I may have a rooster from pen 3 heading up pen 1 year, and next year I may have a rooster from pen 2. Or if I got really good results, I'd use the same male over again. And
So,
some people,
like with that, do you have one rooster, 2, 3? And where does that rooster stay versus where your hens are?
if I had, I wound up with way too many breeding pens, but I had 10 breeding pens at one time. And I had a male in each one of those pens. And I had a male to replace him that was related. So I always had a backup. that I could go to go forward.
All right. So you had 10 males, one in each of your 10 pens
Mm-hmm.
with the females. And then you had 10 more males somewhere else,
Just hanging out in a
hoping
bullpen.
for a chance.
And I may have anywhere, some of my pens that I was doing some experimenting with, I only had 2 females, so I just had a trio of birds. Some of the pens, like I'd have 10 or 12 females in there with a male.
So with doing that, how long was it before you started seeing good results?
I think probably less than 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. And let me qualify that a little bit. By good results, I'm not talking about winning shows, okay? But birds that I was happy with, that I would have been happy to put my name on. I wanted uniform birds. I wanted birds that looked alike. And by using related females, that's how you get them.
Okay. Here's a curveball.
Okay.
Roughly how many chicks did you have to hatch out to find that?
Well, I was hatching and selling a lot of chicks at one point. I was probably hatching 1,500 to 2,000 chicks, and I would sell the majority of those. But I guess to find birds that I wanted to put back into the breeding pens, I was probably raising 20 chicks, no more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as bad as it seems, but you got to be able to do that. I'm going to be real honest. You have to get birds from a very high quality breeder, and you have to buy the best birds he will sell you. It's the only way you can do that and make it work.
And we're talking about reds here, but that would apply to any kind of bird.
Absolutely.
And I want to say that because some people are like, well, we do game fowl, but in looking for someone to come on the show to explain this, that's
not many people will do that.
Not many people will do that. Not many people are wanting to share their secrets on selection or how they move birds about a breeding pen. I've heard people that say they were sharing their information that told some of the most ludicrous crap I'd ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
And so, I'm trying to answer a lot of these people's questions with the best way possible because I don't have a dog in the hunt.
Right.
I feel like everybody should have the same advantage as it relates to knowledge and nutrition, and the show results are depictive on the quality of the individual doing the breeding. Because a lot of people, they will go spend $3,000 for a trio of birds that when they were on that person's farm, they were amazing. But they did not feed them the same feed. They did not house them the same way. They did not care for them the same way. And
they didn't breed them the same way.
They didn't breed them the same way. And they changed, and they're like, man, these birds used to be great. I paid this much money for this big name person's birds, and now they suck. Well, personally, I think it's because they didn't do their homework.
Exactly right.
And they did not find a mentor. And another thing that's going to lead me into the next question, how important is keeping good records, not just records, when using this system? And what kind, like, did you wing band, leg band? How did you keep the records, and what information did you document when doing that?
The information I kept kind of evolved over time. Probably the first couple of years, I was just interested in who the parents were, okay, or what breeding pen they came from. But then as I began to refine my birds, um, what I focused on was different. So the records I changed was different. But I would want to know now if I was to do it all over again, I would want to know the parents, of course. I would want to know the hatch date. I would want to know body width, body length, body depth, width between the leg. That's important because if you don't have width between the leg, you got narrow birds anyway. But you just have to track a lot of things. The bottom line, Kerry, is the more information you track, the better breeding decision you can make. And the more information you track, it will make you pay much more attention to your birds. And when you can do that, to me, that's always a good thing. But I want to go back to one thing we were talking about a little earlier, just a few minutes ago. But one of the reasons I got into trying to help people, now, as you know, I've invested a lot of time in that, and Jeff knows that. But, dadgum, when I was a teenager, trying to get information was like pulling hen's teeth. You couldn't do it because people were tight-lipped. People are still tight-lipped. And so I knew how badly the lack of good information affected me and how it delayed what I was able to accomplish. And if I can keep somebody from having to go through that, if by giving them good, sound information, keep them from making some of the same mistakes that I made, man, that makes my day.
And I mean, that is huge, because you're so correct. There's a lot of people out there that they're so competitive that they will be dishonest to somebody because they're afraid that they're going to wind up across the deck at a show one day with that person, and they don't want them to have an edge. And so
those are people I could just squeeze the seeds out of their Adam's apple. Man, that makes me mad.
I mean, and to me, that goes back to, if you're trying to get every competitive edge, and I get that, but if you share information and you help people, you could take the best show person in the world, won all the trophies, the biggest shows, and they could say, okay, this is how I do it, step by step by step. And they share that with 10 people. They're still going to get 10 results.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because
there's
out of that 10, maybe one will follow it step by step, verbatim, and do it exactly that way. And to me, that's what makes the breeder, that's what makes the bird, is who's willing to do what nobody else is willing to do.
Exactly right. And a lot of these folks that you run into that talk a big game, they can talk the talk, but they can't walk the walk. And I say that because they are in it for themselves. If you want a really good breeder, look for people that are in it to improve the birds, not improve their reputation.
And I'll say this, and this may be unpopular, But the person out there selling thousands of birds, hundreds of birds every year, they're a hatcher. They're not a breeder. And you may want to look at where it came from, because the more show people that I have met, a large number of them won't sell their birds. You know, I know somebody that will fly his birds all over the world to show. And if you ask him to sell you one, he'll tell you no, they're not for sale.
You know why that usually is? The breeders that refuse to sell you birds know what they're doing. And they know that if they just sell birds willy-nilly everywhere, in a couple of years, those birds are going to look like crap. That line of birds is going to look like crap. And who's that going to come back to bite? It's going to come back to bite the original breeder every time.
It will. Last question I have, and we've got about 12, 13 minutes. So hopefully,
Okay.
you know, it'll give us some time for some Q&A. But what are the keys to being successful with this type of breeding system? And would you encourage others to use this, or would you encourage them to tweak it to hopefully one day achieve perfection?
Okay. First, I'll say that I would encourage folks to breed their birds the same way the person they got them from bred their birds. But you have got, and what are the steps to go through? Start with the best quality you can find. Put your time into doing the research and find out who has the birds that are on top. Learn to breed backwards and forwards before you buy any birds. That'll save you a lot of grief right there. You have got to, if they let you pick out the birds, you have got to focus when you're choosing birds to buy. It's not always possible. I was just lucky that Mr. Reese treated me the way he did. But, and we talked about this earlier, but when you get in a hurry is when you make problems for yourself.
Yeah.
You have got to be willing and able and have the knowledge to cull harder than you think you're going to have to cull.
And look, when you pay $3,000 for a trio of birds and you hatch out 20 chicks, culling them things is tough. But that's where I think talking to the person that you bought them from to learn their process, because if you don't know their process, you're not going to be able to duplicate it.
It's you're right. It's very tough.
So your birds are not going to be the same as what you bought.
And those expensive birds, it's really easy to form an emotional bond with that line of birds.
Yeah.
And that when you start doing that, you're not going to be culling your birds enough.
I used to be that way. I don't really care now. If its toe doesn't look right, it's getting frozen. If its beak doesn't look right, or if its head's not right, I'll do it. You know, I make it a point. I've got a hatcher that I can put, I want to say 20 chicks in one box, because like this thing's the size of a refrigerator. But I make it a point, whether I'm taking 300 birds or 10 out, to pick up every single chick. And a lot of people, I've seen them, they'll just get the handfuls of chicks and throw them straight in the brooder. But I pick up every individual one and I want to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, Jeff designed the feed that I feed, and it's really great. Solid recipe. The man knows what he's doing, but it is not cheap. So I don't want to feed it if I'm not in love with it. So that's why, I've learned what I'm looking for, what it looks like at hatch, because I do breed that same way with the birds. And I either want them to look like a little clone of what egg I put in there, or
Exactly.
it's not going to get fed.
And you hit on something that's really important. That I've got 2 more points that what I would suggest people do. And my next one is feed the very best feed that you can find. If you don't know what goes into a good quality feed, reach out to one of the 3 of us. We'll help you. Join Jeff's Poultry Breeders Nutrition Group. Tons of good information in that group. And lastly, improve your flock management skills. You can't treat the birds the same way, the same time, the same way all the time. Sorry. Because you're going to run into things this year that you didn't see last year, and you have to be able to deal with those.
Mm-hmm.
You can't know enough about nutrition, and you can't know enough about flock management. And you asked me a question, part of a question, and I realized I didn't answer it. You asked me how I deed my bird. I toe punched all my chicks at hatch. I would toe punch them so I could tell whether they were from pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You got 16 different toe punch combinations. And then once they got up to about 10 days, 2 weeks old, I would wing band them. So that told me what pen they came from. But it's also a way I could, with that wing band, I could trace that back to my records and identify that bird.
Because then you could identify the hatch date.
Yeah.
The sire for sure. The dam would be one of a few. So you would know. And that way, by narrowing it down to the pen, at least, if you start seeing a lot of cattywampus results out of one pen, you need to check out that pen. Otherwise, you're getting what you look for.
So, another thing I think I would do differently, or I do differently, is, back when I was starting, it was expensive to take a photograph.
Yeah.
And if you've ever tried to photograph chickens, you probably know that you're not going to get the shot you want in one shot. But with digital cameras today and our cell phones, it doesn't cost you anything except a little time to get a photograph. Document those birds in photographs. Start at day old. Then I'd take a series at day, a picture of each chick day old. I'd take a picture at 10 weeks, and I'd go back and take a picture at 20 weeks.
That way you can see the progression.
Right.
That makes sense. One thing Jeff and I have talked a lot about is taking a bucket, flip it over and watch your birds.
Absolutely.
Observing your birds. And when you brought up that about the picture, that reminded me of a couple times where I just went and sat in the grow out pen and I would take pictures of birds there. Cause yes, I'm not that old, but my eyesight has been atrocious since I was like 13 or 14. And if I didn't have at least contacts on, I couldn't read the computer screen 1.5 feet in front of me. So I will actually take pictures of the birds while I'm sitting 10 feet away from them.
Oh, sure.
And zoom in on my phone. And
you hit the nail on the head. That's important to do that.
I found birds that didn't like the results because it helped me notice something that I did not notice with the naked eye.
Well, the other thing that makes it easy to do that is that when birds are out walking around, being a chicken or doing the chicken things, being natural,
Chickens being chickens.
chickens being chickens, they're going to pose naturally.
Mm-hmm.
You put them in a show coop, and unless you work with them a good bit, they're not going to pose worth 2 cents.
Makes sense.
I mean,
You
they're
put
going to
them
be.
you put them in that environment, and they don't know how to act.
Oh yeah,
So you got to work with them.
strange situations, strange birds, strange sounds.
Jeff,
You
you
get
were going to say
strange
something a
looks.
minute ago.
Well, I've got a few questions before we kill the show. So,
Okay.
I want to go back to body, like you were talking about measuring birds with your hand and like what you're feeling for across the back. But how many? Because I just had my hands on a bunch of birds, a week ago. How many fingers are you when you're measuring that depth from the end of the keel bone to the pubic bone, the pelvic bone? What do you just give guys a reference point? Because I felt birds with like 1.5 fingers, and I know that's
Yeah.
not enough. Same with hands, and then so as a judge, what do you not just a judge, but as a breeder, what's that number?
In my birds, okay, I like to be able to fit 4 finger widths between the tip of the keel bone and the vent, which is going to be pretty much in line with the pubic bones.
Okay, but now most of the guys here are going to have games, right? So they're not going to be.
They're not going to be that big.
They're not going to be 8-pound, Rhode Island Reds.
Right.
So 3 fingers from the.
Yeah, could be. What I found that I did, Jeff, was the more that I handle birds, and when I would start, it's rather than compare birds to a certain number on the book, I would handle a bird and I say, okay, is this bird better or is this next bird I'm going to handle better? So you handle 2 birds, you eliminate the poor bird, pick up another bird. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the first bird better or is the third bird better?
Right. Now I've heard you want a flat back and you want a back about the size of your hand, right? So you should be able to set your hand, that back or the back of that bird should be a little bit wider than your hand or a little bit bigger than your hand for a large fowl or, a medium-sized fowl like we're talking about.
It's going to depend on the breed a lot. Reds are a wide-bodied bird, but they're not as wide as a Brahma or a Cochin. So you kind of have to handle a lot of birds before you got a good idea what your birds are doing and how they feel in your hand. But you get to the point that you can handle a bird for about 1.5 minutes and you already know whether it's worth keeping or not.
Right. But I don't think all the listeners understand the importance of that, that broad back and, that fingers in the abdomen from the keel to the vent. And so can you fill in the blanks? And then I got one more question after that.
The reason we're talking about that being so critical is body width and body depth produces birds that have good body capacity. And the body capacity is the internal portion of the body where all the organs is. Females, that's where they produce the eggs, the whole 9 yards. And if those organs and everything's all cramped together, your nutrition, they don't absorb the nutrition as well. They're just not as thrifty. They're not as vigorous. So if you want good, strong, vigorous birds, get birds that have the best body capacity in your flock.
I'm assuming that's going to lead to longevity, like how long that bird's going to live a healthy life.
Absolutely.
All right. So
The other thing that
go ahead.
the other thing that I did that helped with my longevity, if I had a really good female, I would breed her just as long as I was getting fertile eggs from her. I had some females that were 7, 8 years old that I was still hatching eggs from. And when you can do that, you've got good longevity.
Well, and you got a lot of offspring that you can
Yeah.
carry on the bloodline with. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right. So you're talking about mostly pen mating or kind of clan mating earlier, like putting a rooster in with a group of pullets, hens, or whatever.
Right.
At what point, when do you pull the trigger on individual mating? Like when do you know you've got the female and you've got the male and you want to be that precise?
That, I'll be honest with you, that is a hard question to answer because in some breeds, and Reds is one of them, in some breeds, your best breeders would never cut it in a poultry show. There's just something about them that wouldn't work. But you have to know what bird you have produces what quality, and then learn how to combine them. It's not something you're going to pick up in a year or two. And you know, good grief, I've been doing this for longer than I care to admit, but I learn something every time I go out there. I learn something every time I get online and I look at stuff. I think one thing that's helped me more than anything else is working with Poultry Keepers 360 and Poultry Breeders Nutrition Group. People come up with some good questions and they really make you stretch to remember. Of course, that's probably because I'm so old. But
All right, Jeff, did you come up with any others?
No, I just, and we didn't do a whole lot on the line breeding aspect as far as, specifically going back, son on mother, father on daughter kind of thing,
that's because I
Go
didn't
ahead.
breed that way.
Okay.
Um,
I know a lot
and
of the guys are curious, and and I know, a handful. Well, so let's back up, right?
yeah,
Is if you got birds from somewhat of an unknown breeder, supposedly, that you got birds from the same family or the same line, one of the quickest ways to know that is to do that, father back on the pullet and or son stag back on the hen. Because when you hatch those, if you see a bunch of weird stuff coming out, if you see a lot of strange genetics, being thrown out there,
you got
chances
problems.
are they lied. Yeah, you got lied to pretty bad.
Yep.
Because you should be able to do that and have at least a 70% uniformity, coming out of that hatch. So
Easily.
it's one way to get rid of hidden defects that you may not have known about, right? So,
And I'm going to throw this out there, and some people are not going to like what I say. But if you want to eliminate defects in your flock, don't just get rid of the birds with the defects. Get rid of the parents that produced them.
It's not going to change.
yeah, once you do that back cross, that line breeding or that
They'll tell you a
inbreeding,
lot.
well, you can probably hopefully you can get your starting point from there, your foundation, to move forward. But yeah, but like Kerry was talking about, there's a lot of guys out there that'll sell you birds, and just like Mr. Reese that you bought your birds from, I'll tell you what, I've been hanging around a lot of breeders these last 10 years, and if somebody's in a hurry to sell you a bird, chances are he doesn't have what you want, right? And if you got to build a relationship and get invited to somebody's chicken yard and you might have a chance at going home with a hen and a rooster, that's probably more the person that you want your birds from.
Mhm.
And they may not even be for sale. If you prove yourself, a lot of times they'll give you a bird to get you started, right?
Absolutely.
And
I've seen that many, many times.
many times.
Or the deal that they make with you will be very obvious that it was more of a gift than anything, because I've had the opportunity to buy birds that were worth $1,000, and I think I paid $75 for it.
I on more than one or two occasions, I would go up to visit with Mr. Reese, and I would tell him, I'm having this problem or I'm having that problem. Do you have a bird that could help me? Yeah, I think I do. But when I got ready to leave, I get the bird and put him in a box and say, okay, how much do I owe you? And every time it was just your goodwill.
It goes a long way.
Yeah.
And you couldn't have bought those birds off of him. Reminds me of Buddy
Yeah.
Day. Buddy Day was another red breeder up in the same town where Mr. Reese lived.
So let
And
me ask this.
yeah,
There's a couple questions that I want to hit, and then hopefully we won't go a whole lot more over.
well, if we go over, we go over. So what?
One person wants to know, what about a rooster that does not crow good? Is there anything you can do for that?
To be honest with you, I've only had one problem rooster like that. And I had him in a breeding pen, and I thought, I don't know if this is a wise move or not, because I was concerned if he's not going to crow, he's not going to be a good breeder. I got great fertility out of that. I don't know if there was a physical problem that he wasn't crowing. I mean, he looked healthy. He did chicken things right. I don't know, Jeff, have you ever run into anything there?
If they're not crowing right, I really worry that they went through some respiratory distress.
Could very well be.
Even minor, right? But what guys don't understand is lungs are really hard to repair, lungs and air sacs in any creature, and they always leave scar tissue behind. So if they've ever gone through, a respiratory type of disease or illness, it's going to slow down how they grow. It's going to slow down how they perform when they're adults, because they will never have 100% lung function. Okay. And this is actually in most animals. It's not just chickens. Okay. So I see this universally with all the animals, all the farm animals that I work with. Pretty much, and I hate to say it, but it's gonna piss them off. But if they've had respiratory issues, you might as well get rid of them, because they're never ever going to be 100%. Now, if your gene pool is shallow, and you need to breed it. Okay. But you gotta, you're going to have to make that hard call when you have the right replacement.
And that could be something as simple as, not having a clean brooder and having too much ammonia, down to, whatever with that, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that can cause respiratory issues.
Yeah.
And not just in chicks, but pretty much any time through their life. I mean, high ammonia, high humidity, too much dust. It's a long list of things that can irritate their lungs and cause a problem. Needless to say, the diseases that the sparrows and the starlings and the wild birds are carrying. So, there's a lot of crap out there.
I don't. So many of the old time breeders I knew, and these were guys that were super breeders. To a person, would never breed from a bird that was sick the previous year. Bird got sick, they were gone.
Well, that's a testament to the vigor.
Well, it is, but that bird's not gonna produce enough sperm, or eggs or whatever, right? So a lot of those illnesses never go away 100%, particularly a virus type bacteria, a virus type illness stays in that body, stays in that bird pretty much the rest of its life. And every time you have a stress event, like bad weather, whatever, it's going to flare
come
up.
right back.
So you might as well send them to freezer camp, or
I met
whatever.
Miss Donaldson one time, and she's the person Mr. Reese got his birds from. And we were at a show in South Carolina, and somebody asked her, says, Miss Donaldson, what do you keep in your chicken medicine cabinet? And she looked that guy right square in the eye. She said, a sharp hatchet.
Yep.
It makes sense. One person said that they suggested to also order wing bands every year. And if you do that, you can either have them put a 25 on the opposite side, or like start your number out with 2-5 and then, 1, 2, 3, 4, however many chicks you think you might hatch out. That way you'll be able to look at that wing band and know the year it was hatched.
I finally got to the point I was using so many wing bands, I decided to spring for custom wing bands.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't do that, but I just had a numerical sequence, 1 through 9,999, for example. So I could go back to that number and I could look it up that way.
So I had somebody reach out to me this past week, and they asked me if I used bands and if they had their farm name on it. And I said, yes. My birds that I keep, I do. And he said, I think I found one of your birds. It belongs to a buddy of mine. And this is a good ways off. And he said, those are beautiful birds. And I said, well, I only breed a couple of different types. Which one was it? And he told me, and I was able to go back and look at my sheet. And I said, oh, that bird hatched out at this time. And this is what it was like. This is when it went out to the grow out and all that. And, the guy was impressed with the records. Then he also asked if I had any for sale, and I told him no.
Yeah.
But
and that's what you can do when you keep good records, Gary.
I wish I hadn't sold that bird. And after what this guy told me, that further justified why I wish I hadn't sold it. But, it is what it is.
And, we're talking about toe punches and wing bands. There's so many different combinations you can use to track birds, zip ties. I've seen those used, but the problem I have with zip ties, chickens grow so fast. You put them on there when they're chicks, you got to stay after changing them out to the next size because you can cut into the leg. You can use numbered colored plastic leg bands. I don't like those because they can slip those off. They can get a toenail hung in there and they'll pop right off. Spiral bandage. I knew one guy that used to color the tops of their heads with a magic marker, different colored magic marker. That was good until they started feathering out.
I was going to say, I have used a paint pen out of the hatcher into the brooder when I needed to mix up a couple. I use paint pens. So, for the first week or two, I could still look in there and tell which one. So when I did wing band them, I could make sure I had the right ones. But there's a ton of systems out there. We're saying you need to pick one, use it, document it. That way, when you get the results, hey, this recipe worked. This is what I need to do. Or this crap didn't work. I need to cull all the birds in that pen and do something different. Otherwise, you're going to have essentially junk in your grow out and you're not going to know what gave it to you, which is a bigger problem.
Yep.
Is
Exactly.
that it? Anybody else have any questions, comments?
The only comment I got is I just really appreciate the opportunity to come be on the show with y'all. It's such a pleasure to work with a couple of pros like you. Maybe you'll rub off on me.
It's
Okay.
getting deep. It's getting deep.
Look, I got some.
Getting
I
deep.
need to go get my hip waders on.
Yeah, I took my boots off for the day.
I know that. That's the reason I said it.
So, in sometime, it'll be a little while. We won't get you back on like next week or anything, but like Jeff said a while ago, a lot of people do want to know the details on, number one, the breeding method you use. Number two, a lot of people want to know the how-tos and whys and what ifs of line breeding, because if they get that premium trio, they want to know the correct way to duplicate it. So
I'm going to share something with you. I debated about whether to say this, but tonight is the first time I have ever shared 100% of how I did it and what I did.
well, I mean, sometimes you got to hold some stuff back.
Well, I'd share little bits and pieces, but I figured why not go for broke? If they like it, good. If they don't, well.
Well, and I mean, I've always been told to have a king, a heir, and a spare.
Yep.
And that's regardless of what kind of fowl you're breeding, because and I would even suggest, I know people personally that have 3 to 4 different people maintaining the same bloodlines because they know that there's no way to reproduce it. And if one flock is totally wiped out, they can go to somebody else that they know. So
one of the
that's
best
all
things,
stuff we can talk about.
That one of the best things they can do, if they got a buddy that raises the same kind of birds you do, give him some of yours. If your birds are better than his, start a satellite flock, start 2 or 3 satellite flocks, because sooner or later you're going to wish you had.
Yep.
And with that, I'll shut up.
All right. Well, with that, good night, everybody. Thanks for sticking around with us an extra 20 minutes. I don't know when, but do look for that line breeding and pen mating show where we'll get in detail and maybe even come up with some kind of graphic for the pictorial learners to help them, or at least maybe they can take a screenshot so they can figure it out later.
Those things.
So next time, we will see y'all later.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night.